Please welcome my new best friend, Dr. Simone Alicia.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I'm so excited for this talk, Renee. I cannot even tell you. I'm so ready. I'm so ready.
Yeah, I was explaining to Simone how in the West Coast in Kelowna, BC, where I'm from, how there's a thing called the quadropolis because those Floridians don't understand these things. But this is where you can snowboard, downhill, mountain bike, do a round of golf, and go on the boat all in one day. It's like an Olympic sport.
Yes. And I was daring to try all four until I realized that maybe I just want to do the golfing in the boat. And then I said, maybe I just want to do the boat.
Yeah. You show up and be cheerleaders.
Yes.
But I love talking about these things because there's always something unique about where you live that other places in the world just would not even think of or have heard of before.
So true. So
Like the
true.
quadropolis. And you can do other activities too, because some people do like the skiing, the mountain biking, and then they'll do a wine tour instead of golfing, and then they'll go on the boat. Right? Uh-huh. I got the wink there.
There you go.
Because
Yes.
where we're located, there's 200 wineries, 300 vineyards. It is one of the biggest, fastest growing wine regions in North America.
What?
It's called the Okanagan. It's pretty cool.
Wow. Okay. So
Yeah.
now that we're besties, when I come and
Yeah.
visit, we know what we're doing. And I'm coming in
Come up
April.
and visit. I'll tell you all the good wineries to go to. And it's really cool because you can rent bikes and you can go. There's a couple wineries right on the lake where you just pull up on your boat and you can have good food and have a couple sips. And yeah, but this is not a promotion for the Okanagan.
It is just a demonstration about how we can open our minds by learning more about people and where they live. And
Yeah.
we'll probably feed into our talk perfectly and seamlessly.
Oh, yeah, about self-esteem. Exactly.
100%.
So let us know a little bit about you, what you are,
Yes.
what you do, but really I want to know, what is your magic?
Oh, that's such a good question. Okay, so I really believe that my magic is teaching. And I know that might sound so simple, but like at the very core of my being, like I incarnated on this planet to teach. Like that has been my calling since I was a little girl, lining up all of my teddy bears on the bed and giving them fake little papers and pretending they were writing. And I've been teaching since like, I don't know, I was like 5 years old or something. So I would say that that is like the beginning of my magic. And as I've evolved and grown and found my way to like the self-esteem world and the personal development world and the mindset world and the mind, body, soul and how it all connects, I'm just like, wait a second. I think my magic is not only teaching, but bringing in all of the different elements and other people's beliefs and all the research and all the things that work and creating a new way for us to use it all for our ultimate benefit. So I think that might be my current magic, but I'm open for it to change and grow and expand.
So you are a stay-at-home mom. I don't even, why did I even say that? You homeschool.
I don't know.
You homeschool, which for me in my mind, I'm like, that's connected to that. But we talked about this prior to recording, how it takes a special kind of person to have a career outside of something in the home while also managing your children's education.
Right.
So what was the motivation to actually be a homeschooling mama?
Yes. Okay. So I think it actually, the question before kind of helped answer this question because I'm like, I'm a teacher. I'm like, you've given me my own. I'm like, yeah, that's why I'm teaching my kids. I'm a teacher. But not only that, I actually know once my daughter was born and that teacher instinct was coming out. I mean, she's like 2 weeks old and I'm like, this is a wipe and it's wet and it's cold and it's white. It's a white wipe, right? Like I'm like all like Dr. Seussing it with everything, just talking to her. And people are like, why are you talking to her? She doesn't understand anything. I'm like, oh, excuse me. She understands. Okay. So turns out she was understanding enough that when she turned like 4 and 5, this girl was reading. Like she was just communicating and reading. And I'm like, all right, so now what do I do with you like in pre-K and they're teaching ABCs and you're like reading. So I'm like, I'll just homeschool you for pre-K. We'll just keep it going. And then it was K and then it was first grade. And I'm like, I think we're stuck in this now. I think this is life. But I have a history of teaching first grade, second grade, and third grade, like in another life was my original career. And I just felt like what was happening at home was just so much more robust and so much more of a fulfilling educational experience that we could offer that it just became obvious that this was going to be our path and we fell in love with it. So here we are.
That it's been a dream of ours. And our homeschooling adventure lasted a month.
Oh,
When I realized you can't actually run a full-time PR agency and homeschool your children at the same time without any help. So the alternative was we would consider hiring teachers to come in, but then you're
right,
still at home with the kid. They're not actually being educated for 8 hours a day,
right.
right? The amount of like information they can actually learn and obtain within that short amount of time is like an hour. So
Right.
I was like, what do I do now? I'm trying to run my business and I have a child at home.
Yeah. Oh
So it
yeah.
didn't work for us.
Yeah. It's a
Yeah.
lot of balancing. It's a lot of everything actually. And I don't know. I feel like we just somehow made it work, and a lot of independent work, and like we just kind of found our path and found our way in there, and it's still working. We're open. I'm like, if things change, things change. Just go with the flow of life. But for now, it's just been so nice, and being able to travel and all that. And of course, they're like
Yeah.
my number one students, so they get like my self-esteem stuff all day. Really, like, okay, mom, we get it. I'm like, really? Watch this video. You're gonna. No,
So
I'm not
tell us
that bad.
about that because you travel through schools, right? And you teach a program or what is this about self-esteem? And let us know how you got into this.
Oh, for sure. So the way that I present this, it's so vast, it's so huge right now that I can go into anything. And I was thinking about this the other day. I'm like, wait, at the end of April, I was teaching a bunch of seniors in the rec center in my city. And literally just last week on Monday, I was teaching elementary school students. And then the Saturday that just passed, I was at a college teaching university students. And I'm like, and then I have another thing planned for a professional group. We're doing a retreat, a corporate retreat for them. And I'm like, yeah, this is for everyone, definitely for everyone. And you can see just like the results of it. It's like everyone's got a brain, everyone's got a mind, everyone needs to work on this mindset and the self perception, and it affects everything. So, as far as how I deliver it, it's kind of like, come on, everybody, like I'm here. If you need me, I am here. And it started in kind of a strange, interesting way. Are you ready for this, Miss Renee?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So I was actually right out of college. I was modeling towards the end of college and kept on modeling as I became a teacher. So I graduated and started teaching in elementary school and was modeling at the same time. And what happened was in both industries, as different as they were, I started to see these little like self-esteem type topics pop up. And I'm like, wait a second, what's going on here? So I would be in my classroom and little girls were coming to me like, am I fat? And I'm like, you're 8. What is this conversation about being your age? Like, I didn't know if I wanted to cry or scream or like teach them. I was just like, what? So that was really overwhelming. And I remember having that thought, someone needs to start talking about self-esteem. Like someone needs to talk about like loving oneself. And then I did like a fashion show a couple weeks later. All these little girls are like out there watching. I'm backstage and I hear the other models. Oh, I'm so this and I hate that and I can't stand this and oh, I'm so this. And I'm like, wait, what? And so we get off the runway, everything's finished, and I hear those same group of girls. They're like, oh, they're so perfect. I want to be just like them. And I'm like, they're not perfect. We're not perfect. They were just complaining, like, don't want to be like them. And I'm like, someone's got to talk about self-esteem. Someone. And I'm like, wait a second. Is this me? Is this, is this my calling? Because I'm seeing this theme repeated. And so that's how it initially started, to do a lot with like looks and self-perception, but it has branched out way beyond just how you're looking and really obviously going into more your mindset and your personal development space.
Oh, I
Yeah.
love it. So
Yeah.
I was just on a show 2 hours ago and something I'm going to talk about on my podcast eventually. But I see this too with kids. So one of my sons is not skinny, but he's healthy and he's got muscle,
Right.
but it's like he's softer.
Right.
And he's so self-conscious about his body. And I don't know necessarily where the kids and people too, but where kids pick up on this stuff because at home, we don't talk about our bodies in that manner at all.
At all.
We're always about like positive reinforcement. So it's definitely school. But also, I'm always curious about this. Is it actually programmed into our subconscious without us even knowing, even at birth, that we're going to be comparing what we look like to somebody else?
I think that we're naturally comparing in so many different areas of our lives. Even in school, technically you're comparing your grades when you're in school, right? Like, are you performing up to standard? And like the doctor is, saying, well, are you at the standard height for your age and your weight class? So like, I feel like there's this standard that is kind of woven through the human experience. And we're trying to say, okay, look at the standard for this, but don't look at the standard for that. And then look at it for that, but don't look at it for that. So it gets really confusing, I think, for kids. And to answer your question even more directly, yes, all of this is programmed into our subconscious. Even before birth, when you're watching television, when you're scrolling through social media, anything that you come across that you see it's like a hot topic or something that's repeatedly brought up, it does become a part of that internal dialogue where you may not even be aware of it. So therefore subconscious, or just somewhere in the back of your mind, they're kind of fueling the way you're thinking and giving you these suggestions of like, should I, is this what I should, should I be this muscle bound guy? And the media, it's just so many different areas that influence us, but 100% it can be living back there without you even being aware of it. And it's definitely getting in from everything that we're living and seeing in our lives, period.
Oh my gosh. I see it all the time in PR. We don't understand how this lack of confidence, lack of self-esteem is one of the biggest things that stops us from growing our business, stops us from putting ourselves out there, from creating social content, video. And I see it the most, which is interesting. And I can't understand this. You probably have the answer to this. The smartest, most beautiful people have the lowest confidence and self-esteem.
100%. Okay, so I've got a couple.
Why?
I've got a couple of thoughts behind this. So
Okay.
number one, sometimes that intellect makes you start that overthinking, as they call it. So you're like constantly like trying to think and evaluate and analyze and like coming up with all the loopholes of why maybe you're not good enough because you have that intellect and it's actually working against you in that moment. So that's like one way that I look at it. And another is the fact that when we are, how do I want to describe this? So when we are comparing and trying to see where we measure, it's just, I have so many thoughts in my head right now. I'm just like, wait a second, because we shouldn't be doing this. So, but the bottom line is, I feel like when we get to that stage in life that we are so hyper aware, even though we're considered beautiful or we're considered smart or it's never about what someone else thinks. And I think that's the biggest piece that people misunderstand, that self-esteem is something that's like, it's a standard that's set by someone else, but it's not. A self-esteem is literally from the self, hence the name self-esteem, right? So when you grow up and you're like beautiful and smart and everyone is feeding that to you, like that's cool and it works when you're like, 9, 10, 11, 12, whatever. But then you get to that age where you've got to feel it. And then you're like, I don't feel it. And then like, well, why don't I feel it? Because you never practiced actually feeling it, which is kind of the part of my work where I'm like, you've got to practice the inner dialogue that leads to self-esteem. You have to practice the feelings that feel good. You don't just kind of sit there and it just pops in. You've got to really practice. So someone who's been sitting in that intelligence and that beauty for so many years, or even in their recent years, if they've had a glow up, quote, end quote, they just
Every
don't,
day.
right? They just don't have that practice and that inner dialogue that's saying, okay, how can I support this, my own beauty in my own way and my own intelligence? They don't feed that. So if you don't feed it, it can't grow, right? Like a plant, it just doesn't grow.
So this is fascinating. It also reminds me of an employee I had, we'll say 7 years ago, who we hired straight out of university. Smart guy. He's got like straight A's and he was in economics and he interviewed really well. He started working with us and he wasn't performing. So we brought him aside and we really liked the guy. His name was Sid. He was an international student. We really liked having him there. And we were always the type of people that would employ the people that didn't have the best experience, but were the funnest to be in the room knowing their potential.
Yes.
The possibility was there. So he had a couple hiccups and we're like, well, let it slide, teach him. He's got to start somewhere.
Right.
But he made a couple big mistakes to the point where we actually had to let him go. So we let him go in the kindest way possible. And he owned up to where he wasn't performing. And when he came the next day, so after we let him go, we said, listen, come back and give us some reasonings behind why these things happened. Because we really did want to make sure that he was left in a good position. He had a letter of recommendation, all these things. And when he sat down in my office, this is what he said. You know what? I grew up always having straight A's. Work wasn't hard because academics just came to me. The moment I actually had to implement and perform in life was when things became difficult and I couldn't show up, because as an intellectual person, reading a textbook for him was so easy. But then he actually had to do the work, and it was stuff that didn't come easy to him. He failed miserably.
Yes. Yeah.
And so his self-esteem, can you imagine being that perfectly smart student in school to showing up in his first corporate job and failing? Like,
Yes.
phew,
Tanking it.
yeah.
It's so important that, and that's why to me, we've got to like make sure that people, especially our students, are not completely building their identity around their academic performance. Like, it has to be more than that. Like, what your self esteem is not just, well, I get straight A's. And so I am straight A person. Like, wait a second, life is really dynamic and it's going to have a lot of elements. Like, that's not the only thing you want to be able to stand on, although it is important. You can't completely identify as just someone who makes straight A's. Like, what about application? Like the person you're talking about, he was able to apply things that he was learning or whatever it was, like in an actual working capacity. And that's torturous on your self-esteem and your image of self and what you're capable of doing. That's a lot. Oh,
It is a lot. And we loved him. We
yeah.
really did.
Well, now I love
So
him.
so you think about all these scenarios too about like intellectually smart, beautiful according to whatever standards beautiful is, and I'm rolling my eyes at this.
Right.
Um, what do you do to help people create unshakable confidence and grow their self-esteem? What are some of the tools that you use or things you teach?
Okay, so number one, the top of the top, I'm going to just tell you how I define self-esteem, and I usually make people sing it. Okay, I turn it
Oh, well,
into a
I
jingle.
am not a good singer.
I didn't say I was either. However, it's a
Well,
little
so you're
jingle.
going to sing it to us. Love it. Okay,
I'll
thank you.
sing
Let's
it. I'll
go.
sing it. Right. So I always say self-esteem is the way I'm thinking and feeling about myself. So I'll say the way I think and feel about myself, the way I think and feel about myself. Right. And then I'll usually have like somebody's giving me a beat on the tables and we get really like excited about it because I want people to understand it's how we are thinking and feeling. Those two elements. And when I tell you it goes deep, like we'd have to talk for like 8 hours to get into the depth of what thoughts and feelings actually do to the physical body and the chemistry and all that. But just to keep it on the surface, I like to define that self-esteem with the thoughts and feelings because they have such a big impact on our entire lives. So when I am going to teach somebody about how to raise your self-esteem, I'm starting with what are the nature of your thoughts? What are you thinking? And then I get into the how those thoughts actually impact you on a different level. It's not just, hey, think positive so you can smile and you can be, positive, you can be nice to be around and have a nice, handsome or pretty face. It's not just to like placate and just like, oh, look, you look chirpy, so that's great. It's actually the thoughts create different chemical signatures in your body. The thoughts are sending chemicals throughout your body and helping to create biological changes. So when I'm talking to someone about shifting, I'm talking about what are the pictures you're keeping in your mind? What is that imagery when you're seeing yourself? What are you seeing? When you're seeing life, what are you seeing? When you're thinking about the past, what are you seeing? What are you thinking? What is the language? What is your focus? Are you focused on a topic, but on the negative side of the topic or the positive side of the topic? And it's not about faking. It's not about lying. It's not about pretending. It's about searching and choosing and deciding and being very deliberate about what those thoughts are you want to have because you understand the way that that impacts you biochemically and in your body. And then that will lead to the feelings you're having. And then when you elevate those emotions and you have a very clear vision of the thoughts, you create memories in your brain. Your brain's like, oh, let's record that. Simone's seeing a positive life and she's feeling good. Record it. Like, so your brain's like, oh, that must have happened. And all of a sudden you're like actually setting your brain up as a GPS for like, oh, this is something that can happen to me. This is something I know. It's familiar. I recognize it and I can aim for this. So self-esteem is the same thing. It's setting up those pictures in your mind and those thoughts in your mind that are conducive with what you say you want. Like, how do you want to live? How do you want to feel? Start finding those things, holding those pictures, elevating those emotions, and watch how literally chemically you start to feel differently and your posture and everything starts to change. And you just watch this transformation that I love so much.
So you don't actually have to have achieved something. You just believe in the possibility of that outcome enough that you build the confidence to achieve it.
100%, because what's happening is you're actually creating, let me give you a little background before I say that.
Yeah.
So I have my certification. I'm certified neuro-linguistic programming practitioners. That is a mouthful. So we will say NLP.
NLP. Oh yeah.
NLP.
Yeah.
And so when you are using the elements of NLP, it's really about programming. It's like, what is the program that I'm running in my brain? So if I was going to program a computer, I wouldn't have had to already play the game to create the game. I just have to have the code to create the game. after the game is created, now you can play it, right? So it's kind of the same thing in your mind. Like you don't have to have achieved that thing, but you have to kind of input the coding, which is like the imagination, the visualization, the mental imagery, I can perceive this, I can conceive this, I can imagine if. And once you create that programming, now you're kind of ready to, quote unquote, if you will, play the game, right? Like walk into that particular path because you created mapping in your brain for it. And even more so when you include your emotions, now you've mapped your brain and your emotions to it. Oh my gosh, it's like something that feels more attainable and your confidence is boosted because it's something you've mentally seen that you're trying to go for, not like this arbitrary, I don't know what I'm doing, but I want to be successful, but I don't know what that is, but like, I hope so, right? You're giving yourself a real goal to kind of go for. So it's real.
That's it. It's the goal. So I remember a year and a half ago, we came back from a Tony Robbins event. Have you ever been to a Tony Robbins event?
So I have not, and I have a weird story about that, but no, I have not, but I have definitely learned quite a bit from Tony in different ways in his old school stuff. Yes. Talk to me. Tell me.
You can't help but be jazzed up unless you're not a Tony fan, but you don't go to a TR event unless you're a fan because 100%. You can overdose on Tony very easily. So we come back from the event, and this was Date with Destiny, so which is like the most intense 6 days, 12 to 16-hour days, all the things, all the work. And he kind of tears you down to build you back up again. But we came back Thursday night, and that Friday night was the beginning of a CrossFit competition, which was really my first ever like competition that I entered that wasn't just an in-house competition.
Okay.
And I'd been doing CrossFit at this point for like 8 or 9 years.
Wow.
And I was just somebody who showed up and left it all out on the floor, but I was never like the winner of things.
Okay.
Now I had a partner. It was a partner workout, a partner weekend. So Caitlin and I, we did the workouts together. And she's like on par, same level of experience in CrossFit. Well, we came third in the competition. And the craziest thing is when I showed up, it's like I had already physically visualized myself standing on the podium with the medal. And so when we're doing the workouts, it's almost like I know it's already going to happen, so we can't lose because I've already visualized winning. And I had put on my poster board with Tony that I was going to win a competition this year. Well, I didn't win it. I came third. Doesn't matter. We still got on the podium.
You placed. That is
hallelujah. Hallelujah. So yeah, we came third and stood on the podium, and it's almost like I was standing there pointing down at my husband, and I'm like, I knew it. I was going to do this. My confidence going in to that competition, because I'd already visualized it, was not cocky, but confident enough that I could lift a little heavier, push a couple more reps, because I knew that's what I needed to do.
Yes. Oh my gosh. There's so much here. There's so much. So number one, I feel like people seem to understand this analogy and this capability with sports more so than anything else, because they'll talk about like, imagine the winning shot, imagine performing at your best, imagine running faster. Right. And people tend to be like, yeah, okay, I got that. That makes sense. And when you try to translate that over into like, yeah, but also imagine your actual confidence, or imagine your performance in a meeting, a business meeting, or on a test if you're in school, or then people get a little bit more like, what? Like, that's not real, you know? And I want to like really integrate this idea and like drill it into your hearts that this works. And it's not just, you know, okay, yeah, imagine it. And like, then you'll kind of feel better. It's literally making these changes in your brain. Like your brain mapped this out, Renee. Your brain was like, oh, there's a vision of me standing up in a winning position. And so it became more possible. It became more probable. It became more likely because it wasn't this foreign concept. You gave your brain this as a possible outcome now. And so your brain's like, oh, that's a possible outcome. And then with all that excitement from Tony, you've got the feelings to back it up. So you're literally firing and wiring new like neurological connections in your brain. Like all this is happening, even though it's just like, what? I just imagine something. What's the big deal? Like, no, you set your brain and body up to perform differently. Like that's how intense it is. And that's how real it is. And I love that you mentioned like, it's not a cocky thing. Cause I feel like the truth is, sorry to burst your bubble, you guys, but like, I feel like when we're trying to do this, part of the like, yeah, and it worked. And I know like we have to like act it out because we're not really feeling it. So we try to get all dramatic. And it's not really authentic because we're not feeling it. And that's why we try to put on the show like, well, I'm going to win, right? But when you really, it's like this silent knowing. It's kind of like this, hmm, what's
Mm.
going on here? I feel really good. Like it's a little bit more of a silent certainty more than this performance and this show. So I love that story. I hope that like really painted the picture for everyone because it's so good.
I love this. Okay, silent certainty. That is so
Mm.
interesting. What happens when you are uncertain, like severely uncertain about something? How do you
Mhm.
build up that self-esteem and the confidence?
So I tell people before you try to go out and physically take action on something, and I do know that people talk about taking massive action. I support that also. So let me even preface it by saying this. We're all different. And I know we all want this like one size fits all answer for everyone, but I'm sorry, it just doesn't exist for almost anything, like for anything, right? I mean, I can tell you the meal that made me, super healthy is not the meal that's going to make you super healthy, and on and on and on those examples go, right? So let's start with that. It's not a one size fits all, but a lot of the times when we're trying to take action and we haven't convinced even in our brains, like if I can't picture something in the privacy of my mind, I can't even imagine it where no one's looking, no one can see it, no one can judge it. I just can't even sit and just conjure it up in my mind for fun, then good luck trying to physically achieve this thing. You know what I mean? Like you won't even let yourself see it privately as a possibility. How are you going to step into it in real life, like in front of people and actually do it? So for me, I think one of the biggest remedies for uncertainty is to start dancing around what could it look like if I was more certain? What qualities could I utilize to feel more certain? I'm going to tell you a story really quick. So I was coaching this girl. She is around 19, 20. And one of the first things out of her mouth was, I can't make decisions. I'm totally indecisive. And I was like, I go, well, when did you decide that you were indecisive? Immediately she's like, ugh, like, how dare you?
Yeah.
And so then I go, all right, fine. I go, so here's what I want you to do. I want you to, just in your mind, just for fun, I'm not going to hold you to any answers you give me through this exercise. I just want to hear how you reply. You agree? She's like, sure. I said, I want you to think of a character on TV who embodies the qualities of someone who's decisive. You are not pretending to be a character on TV. You are not faking. You are not trying to adopt this character. You are simply looking at qualities. Qualities exist for all of us. I can have the quality of shyness or the quality of courage. We're just borrowing qualities. So think of a character and then imagine that you've embodied her qualities. You're still you. You are not her, but you are you with those qualities. And she's like, okay. I go, I want you to sit like how she sits. And I'm like, breathe like how she breathes. Like, give me the facial expression. And she got into it. And I go, I'm going to ask you the same questions that I asked you before. And I just want to hear what you say. No big deal. She's like, okay. And I literally rattled off these questions. And it was just, I'm like, so and so, yes, blah, 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 blah. No, absolutely not, blah, blah, blah. Probably next week. I'm like, you didn't sound so indecisive to me now, honey. You sounded very decisive. What happened? And she's like, oh my gosh, I don't know. I go, yeah, you do. I go, what happened? She goes, I just decided to take on those qualities of certainty and just answered the questions. I don't even, I go, so you can do that anytime that you want. And you weren't pretending to be a character. You were pulling qualities that you have, and they're a little bit latent. You haven't exercised them, but you leaned on those qualities and you knew you had to answer questions. So you answered them. I go, do you think your answers were authentic? She's like, absolutely. I go, okay. As I promised, I won't hold you to it, but please know that you know the answer and you know the decision you want to make. And she's like, oh my gosh.
Yes.
And it was so powerful. So I think that just when you start to ask yourself, if I was more certain, what would I say? If I was more decisive, what would I do? If I, could just jump in and do, what would the first thing be that I would do? And just toy around with that and give your brain some experience and your emotions some experience with feeling the feeling of being decisive or being certain. And you'll watch how it really has a massive effect on your actual behavior. It's amazing.
I posted a story. A story. I
A
can't even. I
story.
put a story on Instagram the other day about how I was totally calling out friends too, but how ironically all of my messaging, positioning, targeting is to work with female entrepreneurs.
Mm-hmm.
Yet currently, my entire roster of clients are men, and I was like,
Really?
okay, this is interesting. So it had nothing to do with my marketing. But there are 0 men waiting in the sidelines to work with me, and there's 5 women waiting in the peanut gallery to start working with me. And so I posted a thing on social and I said, why is it that women are so indecisive when it comes to investing? And they will, but they can't make the decision like that.
Yeah.
Men with the same amount of abundance will say, yep, just send her the invoice. Let's get started. Women are like, maybe next month, or maybe this is something that will start in the fall. And so there's
Mm,
something there, and
yeah.
it's wrapped in confidence and self-esteem.
Agreed.
And some of the messages I got were really interesting too. This is just ingrained in our DNA. It's all part of like the witch wound and ancestral stuff. We can go
Mm.
that far back, but let's go in this lifetime. What do you think that is, especially with women?
I think that the confidence piece has not been clearly outlined, if you will. One of the things I like to tell people when we talk about self-esteem is I say self-esteem is not the same as arrogance, and self-esteem is not about being mean. Like I say, like self-esteem is never mean. And I say that I think it's that fear that if I act in a really confident way, it's going to quote unquote look arrogant. It's going to come across this way. It's going to come across that way. And even when it comes to making decisions, it's almost like, well, shouldn't I think about it? And shouldn't I want to make sure it's a responsible decision. And like this over analysis that really is coming from just, do I trust myself to make this decision or not? Like, is this what I mean? Like, do I trust myself? And I just don't think there's enough practice with that. And this is why to me, it's so important that we can start self-esteem work at any age. Like you could be 5 years old and start understanding the value of your self-talk because that is programming. And you can be already a working professional person who needs to get reconnected with, okay, what is the dialogue you should be having that will help you take the next step? Because you're either having dialogue that's pulling you back or you're having dialogue that's pushing you forward. So dialogue that's pulling you back is, oh, maybe I shouldn't start yet. And maybe this is not for me. And maybe I'm going to lose all my money. And maybe I'm going to be poor and go hungry. And maybe. And okay, those are viable things. I want you to consider everything. I'm not telling you to be blind. Consider the good and the bad. However, I think that sometimes we consider the good and we leave the bad out. Sometimes we consider the bad and leave the good out, which I think is more common. And sometimes people are actually weighing both. And in the case where us as women are wanting to take that step, I think we weigh the potential bad, if you will, and then we just stop there and then don't take the step forward and feeling that if we do take it too assertively, well, was that responsible of me? And it's like, well, that could be just very internally guided of you to be like, this is what I want to do. I'm going to go do it now. And I think we lack practice. I think we lack practice having that dialogue. So we don't have the connections in our brain that default to, let me make this decision. We have the programming that I need to stall and wait and delay because that is quote unquote responsible, right? Like, don't be impulsive. Don't be this and don't do that. And trying to stay nice in the little box and make all the right,
Perfect.
and it's holding
Your
us back.
perfect hair and your ankle length skirts.
Oh, it's holding us. Oh my gosh, so back. So back. Yeah.
Two thoughts came to mind. And one thing I always talk about is how when you're presented with options, you have to make a decision of A or B, or maybe it's A, B, or C, or D.
Right.
Obviously, the more options you have, the harder it is to make a decision. Because when you're put in this position, you think one is right, the other one's wrong. But potentially, they're both equally as good.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Do I go skiing or do I go on the boat?
Yes. The answer is yes. So when I ask my husband questions like that, he goes, yes. ¿Por qué no los dos?
Both.
Like,
Exactly.
why not both of them?
Yeah. Yeah. So then the other thing that comes to mind is when I look at mostly the male entrepreneurs in my life, is they'll say yes to the why, and then they'll figure out the how on the way. I find that women will say yes when they know the how, and then they figure out the why. And so they are already 10 leaps ahead because they said yes anyway.
Right.
Most of the time we feel we have to be married to the decision, that we have to fully commit all the time, when you can still back out if it's the wrong decision.
Right. And I guess, again, maybe that could be the whole like being a responsible thing. I'm not sure, but I would love to answer, like, there's a spiritual element, if I can go there just for a second, to that type of behavior. I feel like when we are able to say, look, overall, this is what I want. I can't see, like, as I say, I can't see the whole staircase, but I can see the next step, right? And so I'm going to go with yes, because I know overall this is what I want. And I do believe, and trust, right? There's an innate trust there in self or in divine or whatever your belief system may be, that everything's going to unfold and it will be made clear to me as I go forward. And then I trust that I can bounce back, or I can pull out, or I can, any number of things, but I can take that initial yes and then trust the process. I think that, again, is a part of the way I teach self-esteem from a mind, body, soul, or mind, body, self perspective. Is why aren't we trusting that the how can unfold? Why do we feel we have to have the control over the yes, the when, the how, the why, the today, the tomorrow, the next month, when in fact that doesn't really help us with coping? Because if it doesn't go right to plan, then you're like, I'm freaking out.
Well, and then if they make a bad decision, they're not considered irresponsible. They're considered decisive and they made a mistake.
That's it.
If a woman makes a bad decision, then she's irresponsible and indecisive and all the stuff.
Right. But like, who's actually saying that though? I feel like that's just the woman, that individual woman saying that. Well, more and more the circle that I've entered into, I feel like that's such a self-placed label or title at this point, because I don't know if we're doing that so globally anymore.
It's still happening. It's still happening. But you know what else is also happening in a good sense is the feelings of people being okay to be more authentic and sharing their stories. Like the people, for instance, there's a couple in Calgary, Ontario. They started the first LGBTQ coffee roasters 4 years ago, and unfortunately they had to close down because of the times. And they wrote this beautiful post about why they had to do it, and it breaks my heart. It really breaks my heart. It was a business decision, and they probably thought about all the reasons why this is going to look bad on them, and they're going to be shamed, and they're not going to be trusted in the business. Guess what? We go through this all the time in business, right? But the authenticity and them sharing the story has inspired so many people. Like, thank you. I talk about this on a lot of shows that a month ago, I had rhinoplasty done. I had a nose job, and it took me 30 years to finally do it, 5 years to make the decision, and also so many sleepless nights to actually admit to my community that I'm going to do this, let alone had it done. So, but what came of it was all of the brilliant messages, text messages, phone calls from people saying, thank you so much for sharing the story. Nobody ever does this.
Wow.
In a world that craves authenticity, we need more people to just be like, I sucked. In a business sense, not that long ago, maxed out their credit card. There were several clients that hadn't paid me. Got to the point where there was one vendor in particular, it was a friend of mine, that I couldn't pay in that moment.
Right.
But all this stuff was happening in the business. It was a weird time. And so instead of ignoring her, instead of putting her off, I called her up. I said, yo, here's the situation. I feel like a bag of crap. I'm so sorry. Can we delay the payments by a couple of weeks? She's like, thank you. Of course.
Yeah.
We're always we try so hard to just maintain this position of whatever it is we've tried to create in terms of identity, that we won't actually be authentic. We won't actually dip into our truth, probably from lack of confidence, possibly, to actually just be like, yo, this is a situation that sucks and I'm going to fix it.
Right. And I guess what drives me a little crazy about that is that when we are inspiring each other, we always say the typical phrases like, no one's perfect, things happen, bounce back. Like, why do we teach coping? Because there are things to cope with in the world. Why do we teach resilience? Because there are things to be resilient about in the world, because everything doesn't always go to plan. And it's like, we are consistently inconsistent, because we will say these things to kind of help boost each other up. But then when actual stuff's going down, all of a sudden it's like, well, no, not me. Like, no, nothing's perfect. Like, things happen. Oh, but no, nothing happened to me. And I just think it's interesting. I don't know if it's just been something I was kind of born with, but I'm like, here's what it is. Here's what's happening. and again, maybe it's just practice. Maybe it's like early programming. I grew up in Jamaica. I was born in Jamaica and grew up with that Jamaican household background. Maybe there's some, something there that was like,
come on.
I knew it was coming. I knew it, Renee. But I think no matter what stage you are with that, I just want us to be so much more, not only authentic with ourselves in terms of what we're going through, but as we're advising each other and we're saying, honey, girl, it's okay if it didn't work out. Like, at least you tried. We need to be consistent with that type of advice and that type of support. I feel like it's like, before you fail, we got all that same support, but then after it's kind of like, well, now it's going to be judgment. But why? That doesn't, maybe I'm just oversimplifying it, but I'm like, why can't we just consistently be supportive about life being life and it not always being perfect? And even then, there's always some way you can lean towards the positive, just like the several examples you just gave us, like what you've gone through.
People just don't share that vulnerability enough because we don't talk about it and we only really filter for the good. There's no like, what's not the B-roll, but what's the blooper reels? Like the blooper reels aren't shared. So we try to maintain these images. So then if not enough people are talking about where they failed, then we just think nobody else is going through this. Nobody else is experiencing this.
That's possible. Definitely possible. I wonder if that has to do with like our circle. Also, like, I guess I'm curious because I guess because I've been so steeped in the self-development world and what I've gravitated to people who are also in that world. So I feel like we have that conversation all the time, maybe just in the place that
I want to infiltrate that circle.
Yeah.
And I'm sure all my listeners want to too, because it sounds like you feel really good.
Yeah. I mean, like, I do, because I feel like it's kind of, and again, I'm not saying this is not representative of the whole world. Obviously people are, are going to kind of scheme and pretend and whatever. But I just feel like maybe where I've allowed myself to be these days, after all of these years of my own, growth and failures and challenges and all that, I'm just around people where we're kind of like, okay, so if something went wrong, we can talk about it, but we don't like sit in it and like, oh my gosh, I failed. We're like, yo, that didn't work. All right, what's next? Like, okay, well, and we don't even like, oh, you failed? I'm so sorry to hear that. It's kind of like, oh, it didn't work. What do you want to do next? And it's like, we're just kind of like, okay, move on. Like things don't work. Okay, let's keep going. And I guess that might echo some of the men too. Like, I guess what you're talking about when men are just kind of like, yeah, I had like 9 businesses, 7 of them crashed. I made $1 million on this one. Like, just like move on. Matter of factly, I think that's where I've just worked to put myself in that world because it just feels better.
Well, I think it's a good reminder then to surround yourself with better people.
And people who will be supportive.
You can actually have that, a community, a posse, a group, whatever it is, of people that will cheer for you regardless.
Yeah.
If you're falling, they're helping.
Yes.
As opposed to shaming you or making you try to fix you.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That is so beautiful.
Plan B. Let's go. Let's do this.
Yeah. Right? Yeah. And like we acknowledge plan A like absolutely did not work. Like we are not pretending plan A worked. We're not like, oh, it secretly worked. We're just going to do another one for fun. Like, no, we're like that flopped. It fell on its face. It's burned. Like what happened? What's B, So wow, I love that you pulled that out of what I was kind of babbling about. I feel like you made that make sense. Thank you.
It's a good reminder. And so like when I come back, when you said like, I don't experience that, it's because you found those people.
Oh, and I hunted for those people because like, I just don't enjoy I don't even know, just as I feel like that's what life should be, is that type of
100% it should be. You have to find the people that see your possibility and your potential.
Yes.
And maybe even more so than you do, so that they'll be like, well, this I think is the right path. Like I want to walk with you.
Yeah.
How can we walk together hand in hand for you to achieve your goals?
Oh my gosh.
With partners, with children, you can teach this to your kids. Yes. I mean, my kids are only 10, 11, but I've seen them go from different groups of kids because we've moved and stuff. And the effect that those kids have on my kids, good or bad.
Yes.
Crazy.
Yes. Yeah, because we influence you. When they have that saying back in the day, what is it? Like the 5 people you surround yourself with, like, show me your friends, I'll show you who you are. It is really true. It's like painfully so true. And for me, I take that and I expand it. Expand it into social media. I expand it into, and I'm totally a snob, fully admit snob about what I let into my brain, my ears, my eyes, my heart, I'm a total snob. Somebody wrote on my Instagram one day, and I can't finish the sentence. Like, I'm not going to stop to like be nice. I literally can't finish the sentence because I don't know what the whole sentence said, because I started seeing it and it was about to go like maybe political. It's like, and you people who vote for, I'm like, what? I don't post anything about voting for anyone, not even like PTA on my, like, what? Like, I don't know. So I literally read the first lines. I knew the rest had nothing for me and I pressed delete. I did not have that like, ooh, I'm so curious. What does it say? I was like, nope, this is not for my spirit. I'm not about to spend the next 3 days trying to delete this from my brain and justify and wonder why he said that. It was like, and that's why you people probably vote for delete. I got no clue what the rest of it said.
The
And I'm like,
permission to delete those
oh,
trolls.
oh, and
It's
don't even read the whole thing. Don't
Nope.
even bother because you're going to ask yourself 40 questions that you can't answer. Like, why'd they say that? Who knows?
So
Did they mean it? Who cares?
my husband has pretty big following on YouTube and TikTok and Instagram, and he'll talk about like parenting and marriage and stuff, and he'll tag me sometimes. But I'll go into the comments and oh, the hate and the shade people throw thinking they know everything about my life. When they take an hour-long video and they snip it into a 12-second chunk, they
Oh, yeah.
think, and it's like, it used to really bother me.
Yeah.
But now I'm like, those poor people, like, I wish I could just hug them
Yeah.
because they're projecting their hate
Absolutely.
and it had nothing to do with me. Although I felt like I was like, oh my God, I'm a good parent. Oh, why are you saying these
Why are you
things? It's
saying-
not true.
100%.
And they're there. They want you to feel the pain. They want you to feel hurt. They want to disrespect you. And for what? What is
Wait.
the good?
I'm gonna add to what you just said. They want you to feel not the pain, their pain.
Their pain.
They want you to feel not the hate, but their hate.
Their
Like
hate.
they're filled with some. I used to tell people, imagine someone walking around with weights that are just so heavy. And like at first you're like, I got this, who cares? But like after like 2 years, 2 months, whatever it is, like a very long time carrying this weight, you just can't bear it anymore. And then here comes somebody walking by like la 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 la, like totally weightless, like I got nothing. Like you're just walking around without any weights. Take this. Like they were gonna just like throw that at you and be like, you carry it. How dare you walk around here looking happy when I'm miserable? So I really had to understand, like, oh, you're throwing your weight at me. Okay, excuse me. Let me just dodge that.
You're like, I'm not gonna.
No, thank you. No, waking up to morning meditation, running every day, all the work I do, the reading, we are not undoing this because you've done none of that and you're filled with anger and hate and maybe other deeper things that are not even quote unquote your fault. I still can't help you enough. I can't carry your weight enough to help you.
You have to protect your peace. That's it.
100%.
Because look at what's happening with you. When you come home, we used to have a sign in our garage door because we'd always come through the garage door that said, please be responsible for the energy you bring into this home.
Oof.
And that meant everything. Because whatever happens on the outside of the world or online, that cannot infiltrate my household at all. Right? Business, these conversations. Like imagine something happened before we got on and started recording. I can't let that affect this because this conversation is incredibly important for people to hear.
100%.
Yeah. That's
so
a responsibility for all
that
of us.
That is so huge. That is so huge. And it's so true. Wow.
Okay.
It's like, oh, that's like.
I know. I just got
my soul.
goosebumps. I gave myself goosebumps.
I know, right? You gave yourself goosebumps, girl. You are good.
I'm so confident.
I have that effect on people, Renee. Okay.
I know. Just anyway. Okay. I got one last question for you.
Yes.
I love this. It's such a good note to end on is when I ask you what it means to be a wild woman, what is that to you?
Oh, the first thing that came to my gut just now was making my own decisions and really following divine inspiration of my heart. Like, and that's all about love. It's not about competition. It's not about overpowering anyone. It's just the pure divine self and being able to just live freely and follow that. That to me is the ultimate wildness, like untamed love and inner power that literally helps to uplift the planet. So that's what that means to me.
Simone, you are a wild woman. So if people want to go online to find you or follow you, where can they go?
Oh, definitely go to theselfesteemdoctor.com, all spelled out, theselfesteemdoctor.com. The same on Instagram. It's the Self-Esteem Doctor. I think TikTok too. Just type in the Self-Esteem Doctor everywhere you go, and there I'll be.
There you will be. She will be there to give you goosebumps. All right, Simone, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, so amazing, Renee. Thank you for everything you do for all of us wild women.